For sure.
I think we have a ways until our closing hymn. And so if the choir does not want to strain their neck throughout the entire service, you could probably take a seat within the pews. All right, welcome. We're so glad you're with us. We come to religious community from many paths and with many diverse needs. If you have come here seeking comfort, may your pain be soothed. If you have come here looking for answers, may you find new questions. If you have come here seeking purpose, may your call be awakened. If you have come here hoping to build a new way, may the path open before you. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of truth, and for the energy of action. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ogden. My name is Dylan, and I am glad to be your worship leader today. We are so glad you're here today in this community that strives to be loving, inclusive, and compassionate. One way to connect with this community is to let us know you're here. If you're a newcomer, welcome again. We're so glad you're here. We encourage you to fill out a newcomer card in the pews and put it in the offering basket when it comes by later. And please stay and chat with us after the service. If you're joining us online, please fill out the newcomer card online. If you have been a longtime member of the congregation, we encourage you to wear your name tag. This helps everyone feel more connected and helps our newcomers get to know you more easily. We love having people of all ages in this community. As you come in, we hope you saw the basket of activities for hands that like to stay busy. This is for all of you of any age. We welcome all the wiggles and sounds of a multi-generational community. However, if you haven't already, please do put your phones on silent. We are so glad each and every one of you is here. Welcome. Our talk today deals with one of the ways those who seek to harm the vulnerable and maintain their hold on power twist their messaging and perhaps even their beliefs to claim such harm is virtuous. Sometimes, said virtue is couched in the language of protecting a different vulnerable population, like women or children. Sometimes it's framed as a need to defend a, quote, superior, unquote, culture against barbarism, and to do the vulnerable a favor by giving them the opportunity to experience this superiority. But perhaps the most abused excuse for evil is, as the Nazis once said, Gott mit uns. God is with us. Now, I love our hymnal and our songs. I really do. But when choosing our music for today, I was hoping to find a song that captured this idea. But frankly, ironic cynicism isn't just a theme that we embrace. So for our gathering music today, I played a recording of Bob Dylan's With God on Our Side, which isn't one of our hymns, but I think maybe should be. So for our opening reading, I'd like to read you all those lyrics. Oh, my name it ain't nothing, my age it means less. The country I come from is called the Midwest. I's taught and brought up there the laws to abide, and that the land that I live in has God on its side. Oh, the history books tell us, they tell it so well. The cavalry's charged, the Indians fell. The cavalry's charged, the Indians died. Oh, the country was young, with God on its side. The Spanish-American War had its day, and the Civil War, too, was soon laid away. And the names of the heroes I was made to memorize, with guns in their hands and God on their side. The First World War, boys, it came and it went. The reason for fighting I never did get, but I learned to accept it with pride. For you don't count the dead when God's on your side. The Second World War, it came to an end. We forgave the Germans, and then we were friends. They murdered 6 million. In the ovens they fried. But the Germans now, too, have God on their side. I learned to hate the Russians all through my whole life. If another war comes, it's them we must fight. To hate them and fear them, to run and to hide, and accept it all bravely with God on my side. But now we've got weapons of chemical dust. If fire them we're forced to, then fire them we must. One push of the button, and they shot the world wide. And you never ask questions when God's on your side. Through many dark hour, I've been thinking about this, that Jesus Christ was betrayed by a kiss. But I can't think for you. You'll have to decide whether Judas Iscariot had God on his side. So now as I'm leaving, I'm weary as hell. The confusion I'm feeling ain't no tongue can tell. The words fill my head and they fall to the floor. That if God's on our side, he'll stop the next war. It's my pleasure now to welcome our guest speaker, my friend Leah LaGrone. Leah is a history professor at Weber State University and is also the mother of our tech lead, Connor. She's going to speak to us today about the rhetoric of protection of women, moral panics, and legislative control in U.S. history. But thank you, Leah. We're very glad to have you.
Yeah, that's a great song, right? A lot of what I'm going to talk about today. So very good, Dylan. And I'm short, so I'm going to kind of stand over here, but and try not to read, but I will refer to my notes so that you know that I'm prepared. And then I will cue my child when I need the screen change. So the lecture title that I chose, and of course the political cartoon or the advertisement anyway, really kind of goes with this theme of God on our side, but using kind of this rhetoric under the idea of protection of women and children, but using moral panics to exert legislative control. First, I want to thank you for inviting me. This is really fun. I'm really excited to talk to you and share my work on this, especially as we're all trying to navigate everything that's happening in the legislature right now, not only in Utah, but nationwide. And so we're going to explore this historical context of rhetoric surrounding the protection of women and children, and then how this concept is weaponized to use moral panics to drive this legislation. We're going to examine the deep roots of connections to white supremacy, to patriarchal control, recent legislation measures such as the Utah bathroom bill, and other anti-trans legislation. I hope that by understanding how these ideas are socially constructed, we can better recognize the political motives behind this type of legislation. Connor? So first about me, I'll give you a little bit of background. I have a PhD in history from TCU, Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. My master's thesis, when I was in my master's program, argued that progressive reformers, so early 20th century, sensationalized and exploited women in red light districts in the early 20th century for their magazines and their newsletters. They did this to further their agenda under the guise of protection of women. I called it moral voyeurism. So just a couple of examples. One of the people that I wrote about, J.T. Upchurch, he was a preacher in Dallas, and he started a home for erring girls. And and so what he would do is he would go into red light districts and take pictures of fallen women and peek into the windows of brothels, and then put all of this information in a journal that he created called the Purity Journal. And so what he would tell his audience is that we as progressive reformers have to be more sensational than these dirty magazines. And what he really meant is that sex sells, right? And then if I put this into my Purity Journal, people will buy it and then become reformers, right? So that was really the agenda. One of the other examples that I have that I thought was really interesting is a preacher in Fort Worth. Something that was really popular at the time was called prostitution plays. So in the early 1900s, prostitution plays taken from plays from France that gave women political power, bodily control, bodily autonomy, did not moralize the sex industry. To Americanize it, writers reframed it as redemption, that more women were morally incorrupt or corrupt, and to redeem them, it took men in society to impose this kind of legislative control over them. And so what would happen at the end of these plays is that through marriage or through some type of home for girls, women could be redeemed. There was a preacher in Fort Worth that preached from the pulpit the corruption of this type of information, the corruption of people enjoying these types of plays and sensationalized material. But he had to go watch one of these plays 7 times in order to get this information, right, out to his public, right? It was terrible. And so for my PhD program, I knew that I wanted to continue to write on the history of sex work in the early 20th century, but I didn't know how that was going to look for me and my research. So while prepping for my dissertation, I came across this book from 1913 called A Girl's Fight for a Living. The book details a hearing in Chicago of the Illinois White Slave Commission and the beginning of a movement by progressive reformers that connected low wages paid to women in industrial cities to prostitution, to push a protective wage legislation, which isn't a bad thing, right? But it's kind of the way that it was approached. And by the way, I submitted my manuscript. Yay. The idea was that young women moving into cities in the early 1900s lacked the moral protection of their fathers, brothers, and other men who exerted control over the women in their charge. And this caused women to go adrift, right? Women, of course, were not thought of as capable of making their own decisions, but they were still held responsible for their perceived immorality. So that, combined with low wages, they argued, was a major factor in women turning to sex industry to survive. And the root of this argument, however, centered around protecting white women from moral degradation to become mothers to white children, essentially protecting the race by using the rhetoric of white moral superiority. So the historical roots of protecting women. The idea of protected women has been selectively applied to maintain existing power structures. White men have historically used this rhetoric not for safety of all women, but to justify laws that control women's bodies and reinforce racial hierarchies. First, we have the cult of domesticity. This is a 19th century ideology of true womanhood. I use air quotes a lot, so you'll have to forgive me. Dictating that white women remain pure, moral, passive, and confined to domestic roles. So this idea of morality was based on a very white middle class social construction and focused on having the rest of society fit this image, fit this idea. And they did this by preaching from the pulpit that it's their duty to reform a dangerous Gilded Age society with rampant immorality, abject poverty, juxtaposed with gluttonous displays of wealth, which again is not a bad thing to recognize. But what happened is that many reformers began pushing legislation that reconfigured society. And they focused on legislation to control women, again, through this rhetoric of protection. The objective of pushing this rhetoric of true womanhood was to ingrain in us, ingrain in society, something we still think about and talk about today, that the idea that white women's role was to perpetuate the race. There was even like literature out on the race suicide, right? To be a good white mother to white children. Another way to do this is through sexual purity laws. So they pushed purity laws. One of the most notable forms of purity laws is still on the books. It's called the Comstock Act of 1873. Originally aimed at suppressing obscene material, it became a very powerful tool to police women's sexual autonomy. Anthony Comstock was a devout evangelical and self-proclaimed anti-vice crusader, which I do a lot of research on. And he became the key figure in this moral panic. He founded the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice, and his platform was to advocate for stricter laws against, quote, obscene material and practice. He was then appointed Postmaster General as a way to police this law, named after him, by the way. So the law regulated sexuality. It criminalized the distribution of information about contraception and abortion. So even for married women, any information about contraception became illegal and illegal to possess. Under this kind of guise of morality and protecting women from corruption, because they couldn't decide for themselves what was morally corrupt from them. It had to be legislated. This law, however, set the precedent for federal interference in personal and moral decisions. So this moral panic that led to the Comstock Act of 1873 stemmed from a perceived increase in sexually explicit material. Of course, there was a very vague definition of what sexually explicit meant. And this kind of misconceived notion of the rise of discussions about sexuality and reproductive health. So really it was about controlling this perceived sexual liberation of women. Because, of course, if there was contraception, they could make decisions for themselves. So the Comstock Act, the language in it was intentionally vague. So it allowed for this broader interpretation of what constituted immoral material. The Comstock Act had a very significant and lasting impact on us as society. Like I said, it's still with us today. So it restricts access to information about sex and reproduction. It contributes to the criminalization of certain behaviors. And some of the provisions of the law have been repealed or narrowed, but this kind of legacy continues to affect, discussions around censorship, freedom of speech, and especially reproductive rights. The other one I want to talk about is Jim Crow and the myth of the Black rapist. And so the focus on this one is really, how does rhetoric stir up fear? How does it create a moral panic? Whites in post-antebellum South especially justified racial segregation and violence, particularly against Black men, by invoking this need to protect white women from alleged threats of rape. There was even a film about it. Do you know which one that was? Birth of a Nation, right? Wildly popular, even shown in the White House. Woodrow Wilson said, this is, what did he say? Showing history through like lightning, right? But what it did is it led to a lynching epidemic in the late 19th and early 20th century. Often, of course, following accusations that Black men assaulted white women, accusations frequently unfounded. But it was used to uphold this idea of white supremacy. In the South, an estimated 2 or 3 Black people were lynched each week. And in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in Mississippi alone, 500 Black people were lynched from 1800 to 1850 or 1955. Nationwide, of course, that figure climbed to 5,000. So the idea of protecting white women was not about their physical safety at all. It was about maintaining racial and social control. Consensual sex between Black men and white women, while it was forbidden with the anti-miscegenation laws that were nationwide, it was still widespread. Thus, lynching was a means of imposing fear to maintain order, control Black population, and control white women's sexuality. So if white women were found with a Black man, oftentimes they would say they would either say they had been raped, or they would be forced to say that they were raped, and then that mob would go on and lynch Black men. White womanhood was constructed as fragile. We're fragile beings as women. We have a virtuous identity, but that requires male control. So this reinforces a system where both race and gender dictate these power dynamics. So moral panics and their role in legislation. Moral panics, of course, occur when a social issue is framed as this dire threat, right? To societal values, whoever determines what those societal values are. And these are often exaggerated and politicized to justify these restrictive laws. Historically, moral panics have been used to pass legislation under the pretense of public safety. So what did this look like I told you what it looked like in the early 20th century. What did it look like in the mid to late 20th century, or as my students call it, the late 1900s? Dr. LaGrone, you were born in the late 1900s. Yes, I was. So the first thing that we have, you don't have to change yet, is as some of you might know, the Red Scare and the fear of moral corruption. So during the mid-20th century, it's the same thing that we hear even today, right? During the mid-20th century, fears of communist influence are going to coincide, as some people call me all the time, a commie liberal professor, right? I know, I am wearing red. That's a good point. I wear red a lot. Maybe that does say something about me. With anxieties over liberal education, labor unions, we hear that today too, right? Race solidarity, women's liberation, and same-sex relationships. So the same thing that we're still talking about today. Or as we like to call it, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah? And some examples of this, one example of this, of course, was the Lavender Scare, where LGBTQ individuals during this time period were purged from government jobs under the guise of protecting national security, something we've seen recently, right? McCarthyism extended far beyond anti-communist purges, as we know. So the Red Scare was used to justify government surveillance, loyalty tests, persecution of civil rights activists, labor organizers, left-wing intellectuals, Dylan, and all under this claim of protecting American values, insinuating that any person who skewed left in politics was anti-American, conveniently leaving out that freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and press are deeply rooted in American thought, all First Amendment rights. And then you get to the 1980s and 90s. This is my favorite time, right? Because this is what I have memories of. So the 1980s saw this hysteria over the supposed satanic ritual abuse, if you remember, the satanic panic, right? Which of course led to wrongful convictions and laws restricting media deemed morally corrupting, just like the Comstock laws. So this led to laws that increased censorship of music, television, literature, with conservative and liberal groups pushing for bans on content they deemed morally corrupting. I remember when they put the parental advisory on CDs. Dylan, you remember that? On tapes and CDs? Even, claims of, was it Judas Priest? If you listen to the record backwards, it's like satanic music, right? Yes, yes. So all this like satanic panic. Even on, what was that group, the rap group? I won't sing the song. NWA? No, NWA is definitely, it was Luther, his name was Luther. No. Anyway, it was a rap group that had a song that was a sexually explicit content, which in today's terms would not be a problem at all. I'll think about it in about 10 minutes. That's the way my brain works. So during the 80s and 90s, you're going to have several other moral panics that are going to emerge, including those around the game Dungeons and Dragons, if you remember, satanic ritual abuse, and HIV and AIDS. And these are often going to be fueled by media sensationalism and anxieties about this social change. Dungeons and Dragons. I love this one. The rise of these tabletop role-playing games like D&D with their fantasy, and if you even remember from more recent, the whole Harry Potter thing, right? With magic and this kind of occult themes or ideas of occult themes. These are going to spark fears that they're leading young people into Satanism and drug use, right? Their influence. And this fear, Connor, you better listen, right? Don't become a Satanist or use drugs. This fear was amplified by sensationalized media coverage of people cashing in with publications like Michelle Remembers. Do you remember that book? It was about it storied this idea of repressed memories. And so that if you're put under hypnosis, you can conjure up these repressed memories. And so Michelle Remembers was, if you read it, you can tell how her therapist was malpractice, but sort of implanting these ideas and using them as repressed memories of this satanic ritual abuse. Put it in a book, not surprising, and then it was a bestseller. So made a lot of money for that psychiatrist. There was also the McMartin preschool trial. Do you remember that one? Which it's highly publicized and ultimately discredited allegations of satanic ritual abuse further fueled this panic. And the interesting thing about these types of things, even what we see today, that when the moral panic comes out, a lot of times that's what gets embedded in our collective memories. It's not the debunking, right? The debunking never really surfaces. We can research and find the debunking information later, but what we remember is the panic. What we remember is that moral panic. The other one is the emergence of HIV and AIDS, and this created a climate of fear, intentional. It was discriminatory, particularly against gay men. It was also called the gay cancer. And gay men, of course, it was because initially gay men were disproportionately affected by this disease. Gay men were also regularly accused of pedophilia at this time. Media coverage often focused on the perceived dangers of the disease and connected it with risky, immoral behavior, and to contribute to this moral panic. Connor? The next one I want to talk about, oh wait, go back. Oh, I sent you a newer one. It was the edited. There's one slide in there about the Central Park 5. Did I not? Okay. I'll just continue. If we get it up, we get it up. If we don't, so I'm sure y'all remember the Central Park 5. So it's a picture of the Central Park 5 and then a picture of Donald Trump's full page ad in the New York Times about bringing back the death penalty. Before there was, any kind of information out about these 5 young gentlemen who went on to, it came to find out it was, they were, yes, there it is, improperly accused and imprisoned. So this panic focused on the alleged increase in physical and sexual assaults in public streets by ethnic youth gangs. In 1989, not insinuating that any of these young men belonged to a gang because they did not, but that's the way that it was perceived. In 1989, while reporting on the well-publicized attack on a female jogger in New York City Central Park, the media discovered this newly stylized word called wilden. And it supposedly describes sexual violence committed by a group of urban teens. Sociologically, however, this term wilden became particularly significant because of its racial connotations, perpetuating this stereotype to fear young Black and Latino males because they belong to this dangerous class of people. And so the contours of this particular moral panic as elements of that combined race, class, and fear of crime, like using this idea of fear of crime, especially as they manifest in the media, can be interpreted as a distinctive form of moral panic that symbolizes not only a threat to society at large, but also to a political economy that reproduces these racial and social disparities. And the media is going to play a critical role in amplifying these concerns because there's not the fact checking, there's not the, again, when something like this kind of moral panic infiltrates the media and they only present it in one way, and we don't have other forms of media to fact check that, to really get that information out, we just become reactionary, right? And that reaction doesn't reverse the the effects of these moral panics. We have to stop them in the beginning. Connor? So I know this is a lot of words, so I circled what I could and highlighted what I could. So today you have similar fear tactics that are used to target LGBTQ youth, especially transgender individuals, particularly in spaces like bathroom and sports. Under this same argument that we've used for centuries that threatens women's safety and children, right? In 2024, you have the Utah bathroom bill and other recent anti-trans laws that serve as these modern examples of how moral panics influence legislation. So this bill, the Utah bathroom bill in 2024 mandates that individuals use restrooms corresponding to their sex assigned at birth. My whole thing when this first came out was, are they going to have genital police standing at the doors and, checking us as we go in? I don't really know what they're thinking. They weren't, apparently. There was no critical thinking skills. Maybe they will, which is really scary, and we can't put that past them, right? This is, of course, was citing concerns about women's safety. However, there is no evidence supporting claims that transgender individuals pose a threat in restrooms. Utah State Representative Kara Birkeland, a Morgan County Republican, and the bill's primary sponsor, she argued that it's a necessary safeguard against people who might claim they're transgender to infiltrate a gendered space. She pitched the law as a safety measure to protect the privacy of women and girls without citing any evidence. If you listen to her speech, which I had to do, it just drove me crazy, read anything that that came out in the media, there was no evidence. It was all just rhetoric. This moral panic rhetoric. She used this as a made-up moral panic to justify this exclusion and control. So the idea of the law, though, is actually projecting that men will disguise themselves as women to sexually assault people in bathrooms. While using the fear around trans women, it's really about the dangers of men and sexual assault without addressing the issues of sexual assault. Right, absolutely. Based on a review, so I'm going to read this part so that I get all of it correct. Based on a review of sexual assault complaints studied by the Police Foundation, the way they describe themselves is a national independent nonprofit and nonpartisan organization dedicated to advancing policing, which I have a problem with. For over 45 years, the Police Foundation has conducted research on all aspects of policing and has led the way in bringing evidence-based practices and innovation to law enforcement. That's how what they say about themselves. So they did a study in Atlanta, Dallas, Miami Beach, Miami Gardens, and Tucson before and after these official amendments to these human rights ordinances in those localities. They stated in their study, quote, "We did not find evidence of sexual assaults taking place in which men, under the guise of being a woman or transgender, entered a woman's bathroom to commit a sexual assault or otherwise victimize women. Our overall findings are consistent with the research literature on sexual assault, which indicates that victims of sexual assault are primarily female, over 90%, and that 8 of 10 cases, the assault is not perpetrated by a stranger, but rather by a known person to the victim, such as an acquaintance or intimate partner. That's the evidence. We also have that in 2025, our legislature just passed the anti-trans housing bill in Utah. So this newest law, House Bill 269, requires public universities and colleges to assign housing in sex-segregated student dormitories according to the student's biological sex at birth, even though we've had co-ed facilities for a long time. When first introduced, the bill allowed for a narrow exception for those who have amended their birth certificates or undergone surgery, gender-affirming surgery. But lawmakers, even though they claim this bill protects women's privacy, they removed this exception and revealed, of course, their true intent is to segregate and erase trans people from public life. So such laws use this moral panic rhetoric that tout protecting women and children to criminalize trans existence, to criminalize LGBTQ existence in public spaces. And what it does, though, is it increases LGBTQ vulnerability and exposes them to violence. Just like it did, the same kind of moral panic rhetoric did to Black people in the South during the lynching crisis. So this broader anti-trans legislation, in addition to these bathroom restrictions, Utah passed bans on gender-affirming care and also sports participation restrictions and other don't say gay style education laws. Right? All justified under the rhetoric of protection of women and children. And so you can see here that the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, testified in December of 2024 that he knows of fewer than 10 transgendered college athletes among 510,000. So again, it's a fabricated threat. It's not a real threat. So the political purpose of moral panics. Legislators, particularly conservatives, but we're not going to solely pick on them, have consistently used moral panics to drive legislative agendas, to reinforce these traditional gender roles and maintain control over marginalized communities. How do they do that? Well, they follow a playbook, a historical playbook. First, you have to create an enemy. Moral panics require a scapegoat, whether it be Black men during Jim Crow, LGBTQ individuals during the Lavender Scare, or trans people today. Then they have to distract from the real issues. Politicians use these constructed crises to rally their base, void of any critical thinking. But it also avoids discussions on real pressing issues like economic inequality, healthcare reform, gun violence. We don't talk about that, right? And then you have to expand government control. So under the guise of this rhetoric of protecting morality, protecting women, protecting children, these laws, what they do is they increase surveillance. I'm being surveilled right now with all the stuff that I now have to put online as a college professor to make sure that the public can surveil my syllabus, right? Can surveil my class. Make sure that I'm not talking about slavery is bad, right? Restrict personal freedoms. And they also reinforce these conservative social norms. So the conclusion for today, the need for awareness and resistance. So like all good historian presentations, which I hope you've gotten something out of this, I have to conclude by offering Why is this important to know? As historians, that's our job, to use this historical context, but frame it in a way of why is this important? Why is this important to current events, to current issues? Understanding this historical context with this rhetoric of protection, it reveals its role, this rhetoric's role of actually being a political tool rather than a genuine concern of safety. It's not a genuine concern of safety. It's a measure used to promote legislation, a particular type of legislation. So by recognizing these moral panics from what they actually are, a socially constructed crisis, not real, that is used as a tool to justify oppressive laws, we can resist reactionary legislation from the beginning. Like we have to be just as organized as them, right? To stop it in its tracks before it gets going. Instead of trying to appeal to a moral public, we have to stop it. We have to hit it head on. And we can advocate for policies. We have to pass policies that genuinely protect people, that genuinely promote equality and social justice. Thank you. So I look forward to your questions if you have any. I don't know if we have question and answer, but okay. Well, if you want to ask me some questions.
But when basketball and how the court was divided into 3 sections.
Yes. Utah State University had USU had a great presentation on the history of basketball at the university, and especially controlling young women. Yeah, because they messaged it as you weren't able to, right? And so a lot of these types of laws come from the idea that women's bodies, it's the same thing we got with the 1908 54-hour law and other protective laws, is that women's bodies have to be saved for motherhood. Like that is our sole role, to produce children. And if we're overly exerting it, then that could lead to something happening to our uterus and then causing hysteria, right? That's where hysteria comes from. Doctors promoted it as our uterus would detach itself and start floating around our body, and then and then we become hysterical, because of course men are not emotional. Men can't become hysterical. It's all about women. Oh yeah, you don't have a uterus, and uterus is what causes hysteria. Absolutely.
Yeah, but when I was in junior high, after they passed, we could have a rover on each team.
Uh-huh.
You could have 2 rovers on each
You could have 2 people that could run?
And I always wanted to be the rover. And where was I? Yeah. Then they passed a law, no dunking. They couldn't dunk the ball.
Well, because jumping could detach your uterus.
And it does.
Right.
The current moral path that we have with transgender and the legislation that is coming down. I'm curious, there seems to be other legislation that's coming out in the United States that happens to be familiar, Roe versus Wade, and other things that are affecting women. And you're arguing, oh, this transgender stuff, it only affects a small amount like, this is a small issue. So what, can you draw a line from this transgender, which we say is only about a small amount of people, and how is this affecting this larger, broader issue of
Absolutely. And I used the transgender for today because it was the most recent legislation that we've been bombarded with. But the common thread is this control of women, right? Because when legislatures talk about transgender, and the moral panic around transgender, who they really refer to as women, what they mean by transgender as women. And because there's no focus on trans men going into men's restrooms. It's all about trans women going into women's restrooms. So the common thread is about controlling women. But
coming out here in the United States, is there a line to be drawn between the transgender and the specific legislation that's coming out around women and folks and things that are?
yeah, that's the common thread. It's about controlling us. Go ahead. Wrap it up. Yeah. Well, I mean, but with sports, with bodily autonomy, with Roe versus Wade, it's the same as the moral panic before. It's about making us domestic servants, so to speak.
Well, that's what they're attempting.
That's what they're attempting to do.
Yeah.
It's about perpetuating this control. If you can't have an abortion legally, which abortions have gone up, by the way, since passing those laws, if you can't have an abortion, then women go back to their role of being forced mothers, right? And then everything else will go with it, where we can, there's a possibility of us being not hired because, our role is to give birth. And if we give birth, if we get pregnant and leave on maternal leave, we're no good for the company. Our role as mothers, which is linked to the home. So the central idea, the central thread in all of this is defining women, right? Defining what a woman is. In those very narrow constructions of what a woman is and keeping a woman in her place. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. When we were clearing out our records for the museum, we ran across a pamphlet from 1989, which was from the Weber State University Speakers Bureau. And so there are basically a bunch of topics that you could get professors from Weber State University to talk about. And one of the topics that I believe was by a professor who was also a professor of history at Weber State University was called Satanism and Our Children. And so it was something that you could get a Weber State professor to talk about in 1989. All right. Well, thank you so much, Leah. That was very, very interesting, and thank you for sharing that with us. All right. So, in the interest of time, I think we can. It's all right with everybody. We can skip candles and stones for today, but I want to have a chance for our offering. So, our offering is a practice of gratitude for this community filled with care and courage, love and resistance, and we commit to keeping this community resources for the ministries ahead both in our walls and beyond. The offering we collect each week supports us in being the community that can best respond to the needs of these times. And as we collect our offering today, we remember our interconnectedness and independence, and we generously offer our care with hope to support all through these times. And in particular, our offering today will go to support our Girl Scout troop. So throughout the month of March, our offerings will go to support our own Girl Scout troop that Karen, what was that? And we have one of them here today who's going to help us with the offering. All right. Please rise in body or voice and facing the center aisle, sing together the offering song that we sing every time. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. Thank you. Your abundant generosity is part of modeling our care and love. Thank you all for your generous donation. A few announcements. So first off, the Girl Scout cookies will be sold across the parking lot here today at the church education building on the second floor. So if you want to pick up some Girl Scout cookies, I know I will, please go over there and get some today. And then also an announcement about our congregants Tom and Arlene Zalay. They just had their 4th grandchild this last weekend. And what was her name? Evie. So their granddaughter Evie, their 4th granddaughter, was just born this last weekend. And then there will be an amazing exhibition of sculptures and people with homes who are without homes who are living in Canada, England, and the United States, featuring sculptors Louise Solecki-Weyer of Canada.
Please, raise your hand.
Oh, hello. Welcome. Welcome. All right. Is it Weir? Weir of Canada. And Suzanne's on the pedestals, and our own Suzanne Store on the walls, plus a short documentary film at the shelter by photographer Tom Zalay. It's going to be opening March 27th from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Visual Art Institute at 2900 South and 300 West Salt Lake City. And Louise will be there, as she is here today.
Yeah, and also, all the pottery, when we had the show here, it was just a fraction of what we had, and we only had 9 sculpture. Louise is remarkable. She's having, let me get this right, Louise, this bronze of St. John Paul II, and a 7-foot Sister Teresa installed in front of the Holy Rosary Cathedral in Vancouver, BC. When's that going to happen?
Oh, you know,
Sometime. So,
when God permits.
All right.
So the foundry came into her studio. She has this picture she gave to me, which we're using as a promo, standing up on this tall ladder. And, you know, Louise is not that tall. And the sculpture was 11 feet tall. And she pounded down 25-pound blocks of clay. Did you have anybody helping you do that?
You know what, this is a story I'm happy to talk about after.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. But opening is on March 27th, and encourage you all to go.
So I wanted to say something else.
Is it quick?
Quick.
Make it
I
fast.
just had surgery. I need help. Now, I want to meet with whoever's on the caring committee over there right after the service. If you're not on the caring committee now and you want to help down in Salt Lake with the show, or take care of me after Peter leaves, on April 2nd, come over to the round table.
All right, talk to me about that. We can try to arrange that as well. All right. So thank you, everybody. And our closing hymn today will be number 1024 from the paperback hymnal, Singing the Journey, and it is When the Spirit Says Do.
On this one, we'll do